right, good afternoon, everybody. Here we are, FCC Series episode 20. This is LeadConduit 101, the plug-and-play strategy for one-to-one compliance. Thank you, everybody, for joining us. Just a couple of housekeeping announcements. There is going to be an overlay off to your right there for the chat question overlay. If you have any questions, please click on that question mark there. Submit them and we will get to them as quickly as possible. We will have a Q&A at the end of the presentation. Also, there is a chat bubble at the very top right. That's how you engage in the chat. So please get involved, voice your opinions. Key dates and timelines as far as our countdown update for the FCC. Right here at the bottom, requirements going to be enforced January 27th, 2025. 30, 60, 90 days prior right there are listed as well. I am Jacob Hollifield. I am your host for today. I'm an SDR here at Active Prospect. Stands for Sales Development Representative. Some of you may have seen me at shows on LinkedIn, and today I'm your host. Joining me is Scott McKee and Dion Green. I will let them introduce themselves. Scott, take us away.
Thanks, Jacob. So yeah, I am Scott McKee. I am the product owner for LeadConduit here over at Active Prospect. On to you, Dion.
Thanks, Scott. My name is Dion Green. I am Senior Customer Success Manager here at Active Prospect. Currently focused on home services, as that is a vertical that I've been involved with for about 13 years, but have previous experience working with clients, financial, insurance, education, etc. So glad to be here and glad you all have joined as well.
All right, thank you, gentlemen. So as most of you know who've been following along with this series, we've spent the bulk of it focused on TrustedForm, but today's focus obviously will be on another product from our consent-based marketing platform, LeadConduit. So to start this off, we're going to put out a poll there. What type of leads are you working with? Are they first party, third party, or both? And if you don't know the difference between the two, first party leads are going to be your leads that you generate through your website, all of that internal traffic coming in. And third party leads will be coming from your lead aggregators or leads that you purchase from other sources. So while you go ahead and answer that poll, we'll come back to it later. I'm going to pass it off to Scott, and he's going to give us an intro on LeadConduit.
Yeah, thanks for that setup, Jacob. So LeadConduit is what we call lead flow software. It allows you to create custom workflows for your leads with a low-code approach so that you don't have to have a big team of engineers handling all of your integrations and all the technical aspects of the work. It helps you to make sure that you're really just acquiring the right leads for your specific business. It allows you to, append additional data to your leads and, just ensure that they're getting delivered to the right place. Maybe that's your CRM, your auto dialer, maybe it's your data warehouse. Really any system with a REST API that you want us to deliver a lead to, that's kind of what LeadConduit is really good at.
Yeah, and to that point, Scott, I'll jump in and say, since we're talking about first and third party leads, I get quite a few questions from clients. What's the best way to implement those leads within LeadConduit? Right. And so sometimes there are thoughts that you possibly need a different environment for all your different third party vendors. But from what I've seen typically is that as long as you have the two different flows, two separate flows, two environments of first party leads and third party leads, that's typically the easiest way to track the information. And if looking specifically at third party leads, you don't need different flows or different environments per partner, right? Because the point of LeadConduit is to make it as easy as possible and seamless as possible for you and to simplify everything, right? So especially if it's a situation where how the information is delivered to you from the partner or how we push the information to your CRM, if that typically is standard across all your different partners, then that's going to make it even easier.
Yeah, absolutely. And you really, I like what you said about, you only really need these two flows. We do see some customers who have dozens upon dozens of flows and really, however it fits into your business best, we're there to help you guys. But yeah, putting all your third party leads through one flow is what we see being really successful for folks, and first party through another. It generally doesn't make sense to pay some service to append the originating domain of a lead when you own that domain, right? So you can have that flexibility in how you want to treat those leads differently. And again, I come back to, it's a low code thing. You know, if you wanted to have workflows like that on your own, you're having engineers write codes to have different logic. In LeadConduit, you're clicking a couple of buttons and you're doing that same thing.
Yeah, and also to that point, the CRMs, right? There's the information of how you get the information into our system, but then the seamlessness and easiness of pushing the information over to all of your different systems, right? I have a few clients that I work with, for example, it's not just pushing it to your CRM. Maybe it's your dialer. Maybe you have a dialer such as Five9. Maybe you have a text system, an auto text system such as Hatch, right? As long as there's that API, it's still going to be seamless with pushing the information over to that system. And then not only that, custom fields, right? You don't have to be conformed to maybe what's originally sent to you. There's an easy way to create custom fields in our system. And then as long as there's a place for us to pass it to, and this might be kind of a theme you guys hear a couple of times, but as long as there's somewhere for us to pass that information to, we'll be able to get you all the data that you need.
Yeah, and you can also simplify the way you're getting a lot of that information from your different vendors. You know, this is something I've seen over my 5 years with Active Prospect quite a few times where, oh, this person is sending me this company name field, but it's company. And this other person is sending it to me as CNAME. And oh, man, and LeadConduit just makes all of that technical stuff just really easy. It's company name, and we'll send it to whatever field you want in any system where it needs to go. So it really just cuts down a lot of that technical overhead.
Great. Awesome information there, guys. And, you know, I mean, moving into the FCC regulations and when those go into effect, you know, a lot of people are curious about how it's going to be impacting their lead flow. So before we really jump into that, I do want to put another poll out there. And just how prepared are you for the FCC's one-to-one consent requirement? The answers to that poll are going to either be I'm prepared, I'm still testing, or I'm not prepared at all. And before I go into this next step here, I did see in the chat, somebody mentioned low code or no code with a question mark. Do one of you want to expand on that?
Yeah, absolutely. So when I'm talking about the low code approach, I'm jumping a little ahead here in the presentation, so apologies, guys. But for example, if you want to integrate with a service like TrustedForm, right? If you were doing that in your own system, you know, you're going to need to write some code to call that API, you know, to retain those certificates and verify. In LeadConduit, what you're doing with a lead flow is you're clicking a couple of buttons to add TrustedForm. Make sure you have the appropriate filter. Do you want to reject leads that, you know, don't have a valid certificate or didn't have proper consent? And again, it's just clicking a couple of buttons, typing in your company name, and it's done, as opposed to having an engineer to write the code to have all that logic performed in your own sort of internal system. It makes it much more plug and play, essentially. I won't say no code necessarily, because you might still have to look at API field names, but you're not actually going to be writing code, right? So it does simplify that quite a bit. It's something we hear from a lot of LeadConduit customers. Because I have this tool, I don't need a huge team of developers to make all the changes to all the integrations that we're working with and changing regularly.
Great. Thank you, Scott. And real quick, chat, I will encourage you all to use the question mark on the right there. We'll have a Q&A at the end, which we'll try to get to as many questions as possible. But in the interest of time, we're going to go ahead and proceed here. Next question for our panelists. How can LeadConduit help with the updated FCC regulations? And Dion, I'll kind of let you take it off there.
Yeah, thanks, Jacob. So I'll get into, and Scott and I will probably get into a few specific ways, but just to kind of take a step back, now that we have the FCC ruling, there are probably a ton of you on this call that have had different conversations. And through those conversations, maybe you have the belief or you have a strong understanding, or maybe it's even just an assumption that one of the things that's going to happen with these FCC changes is that the lead quantity will decrease, right? Now, it's a conversation on exactly how much it will decrease. It could depend on the partners. I'm not sure anyone knows exactly right now until we get kind of into the thick of it. But one of the things that's extremely and already has been important, but this just shines a brighter light on it, is then the quality of those leads, right? If that quantity is going to go down, the quality of those leads, obviously you want to make sure you tie up and are as good as possible. Well, the question is then, how are you assessing that information, right? What do you call a good quality lead? And so Within LeadConduit, right, the reporting and the exporting makes it extremely simple for you to extract that information from the system so that then you can use it and look at your systems on the back end. Maybe you're looking at contactability, maybe you're looking at set rates, right? Obviously, there's a lot of other different factors there. But using that information in order to determine, hey, this is what good information is for me. I know we mentioned in the last section how easy it is to to plug and play. And as we talk about the FCC, and we'll dig into TrustedForm here soon, but there are also some additional enhancements, such as many of you may have heard of Blacklist Alliance. So with Blacklist Alliance, right, there's a plug and play in our system to where a couple of clicks, as Scott mentioned, a lot of it is in our system, to where you don't necessarily need a contract directly with Blacklist Alliance. We make it easy for you to check within our system, hey, based on the phone number, is this particular person a known litigator? And then not only that, to go further, right, is this possibly an attorney that typically represents those type of people, right? A lot of this stuff is already important, but again, it just shines a brighter light. And we also have similar integrations to that as well, from Contact Center Compliance, DNC.com, right, Litigator Scrub there as well. And then another thing that you just have to continue to watch out for is bots, right? That's huge, right? Making sure that you're keeping an eye on that fraudulent activity. And we have an integration with Anura that it looks at that IP address and kind of puts that in front of you and shows you if there could be any issues there. And quickly to those points as well, I mean, you can easily push that information or gather that information. And we mentioned the CRM and push that to you as well. So this is kind of what I meant by it may not be information that was passed by your partners or that you originally had on your own first party form. But if it's appended data through one of those enhancements, right, we can take any of that information, we can push it to your CRM. It's extremely easy to export the information. There's even options to do some sort of batch file to where you tell the system, hey, just plop this on a file and send it over to me every week or however frequently you would like that to be. So it makes it extremely easy to get that information, pull it out, and so that you can be able to assess it with your team.
Yeah, absolutely. Again, that I know we talked about this earlier, but that comes back to the low code thing, which, sorry, I'm going to hammer on that a little bit because, yeah, to that point, you can use a Blacklist Alliance or a Contact Center Compliance Litigator Scrub, a similar service we integrate with, or an Anura, and just easily click a button, add it in, and now you're making sure that you're not getting those leads that are from a known litigator or are fraudulent in any sort of way, and it makes that really easy. And as we talk about the FCC. And a lot of the changes that we're seeing a lot of businesses take to get ready for that, we also support ping pick post for lead buyers. And what I mean by that, one of the things that we're hearing from a lot of lead vendors and lead buyers is that their vendors want to be able to check first to see, are you going to reject this because it's a duplicate or something like that, right? And that is something that we do support in LeadConduit today. Our lead buyers can use LeadConduit to give a separate endpoint for their vendors to call to check to see if this is a duplicate before they post them a lead. And we make sure all of that data is anonymous. They're checking to see if it's a duplicate. We'll tell you if it is or isn't a duplicate. But there's no way for the lead buyer to ever scrape that sort of information. There's no way for me who works here to find that information either. So it's really secure and allows the vendors to make sure if something is a duplicate or not before sending it to that buyer. And if it is a duplicate, then it really empowers them to make sure that they're sort of monetizing that lead to the best of their ability. This is something that we're seeing a lot of folks are getting ready to do in the new year to prepare for the FCC one-to-one consent change. So that's another thing that we see being really common for our users to get ready for that change.
Great, awesome. We are doing pretty good on time here, so I'm going to take a question that kind of goes on that, Scott, and we'll see if you can answer this here. The question's from Alex Bryan, and it says, for the new FCC one-to-one, it seems like the language is for robocalls, which is defined as using an auto dialer or ATDS. It seems like the precedent on Solomon and Subway franchise in May makes it clear that the definition of ATDS excludes most multi-line dialers. Can you offer any clarity on this?
That is a really good question. Yeah, so when it comes to defining the auto dialer, that is something I tend to stay away from because it's a kind of a murky area that we've learned a lot. And this is also one that's probably not always the best answer to give, but these are the types of answers that are typically best answered by, I think, some legal counsel for your business if you can consult with them. I certainly have opinions on the matter, but I'm not sure if those are necessarily, if I'm necessarily the right person to check with on that type of topic. I don't know if Dion, if you had any sort of thoughts there on that.
No, yeah, I mean, I'm pretty much aligned with you there. Not much. Yeah, the auto dialer is an interesting, interesting. It's been interesting to talk through. Maybe we can get more information on that for you guys.
Yeah. I do think that's one that honestly, I think it would make a lot of sense for us. And I'm speaking here maybe a little bit to our internal marketing team, but that would be one where I would really want to hear from specifically maybe Ben Farrar on our team, who handles a lot of our compliance stuff. He is probably the better person to get on that. And those of you who have attended a few of our webinars know he's a pretty common presenter here. So I think I will be slacking him shortly and telling him to get ready for chatting about that topic. It's a really good question. It's a bit legally touchy to touch on, if I'm being completely transparent, though.
All right, we still got some time for some questions here. So next question, how effectively does LeadConduit integrate with existing CRM systems and other marketing platforms?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So, if you go to our website today and you go to the LeadConduit section, you'll see our add-ons. Our add-ons are things like Blacklist Alliance, Contact Center Compliance, Anura, services that we resell so you don't have to contract with them. But we've also got integrations, right? Pre-built integrations. We have a pre-built integration with Salesforce that makes it, fairly easy to just plug and play that, as well as many other CRMs. But that being said, those of us who have been in this industry a long time know that there's a lot of CRMs and a lot of dialers and a lot of different systems. And chances are someone has created a new industry-specific lead gen CRM since we've started this conversation, right? They pop up so frequently. And that's what's great about LeadConduit is, while we have those pre-built integrations, you can really integrate pretty easily with any REST or SOAP API that represents any of those CRMs or systems that customers want to send leads to. Before I was the product owner for LeadConduit, I was an implementation engineer and as well as a customer success manager like Dion. And I have helped our customers integrate with SOAP APIs from 1998, right? So please don't make me do that again, but it's totally possible, right? We can absolutely do those types of things and integrate with really any system as long as there's an API that we can communicate with. LeadConduit can communicate with it today. And of course, if we see that there are CRMs that are really popular, that are coming up and more folks are using, then we do make those pre-built integrations to make it a lot easier for folks to just turn it on, put in my API key or username and password, whatever it is, and it's done. But if we don't have that pre-built integration, you don't need to worry. LeadConduit can probably integrate with it right now. And we have a great support and implementation team, as well as Dion's team, who's really good at advising their customers and helping them out with any of those types of projects. So I haven't really seen any that we can't integrate with. As long as they have an API, we can do it.
And to that point, quickly, that's a great point, Scott. I would just also say, as Scott mentioned, right, if they have the API, we often use those docs, just like Active Prospect, right? When working with your sources, you have to provide them a webhook so that they can pass the lead into Active Prospect. We need those docs for that API to then make sure we're pushing it to your systems properly. But to that point, even if it's not something that we currently offer as a standard integration, feel free to let our team know that, right? If you're working with the customer success manager, let them know this is something I use. If we had a direct integration, it may make my life a little bit more easy. And we're always happy to have those conversations and look into it.
Awesome. Thank you, gentlemen. On the subject of integration, I want to go more on the topic of integrating TrustedForm with LeadConduit. So for that, we're going to go into a TrustedForm Verify introduction, and Dion's going to give us some insight on that.
As I unmute, Thank you. I promised myself I was not going to do that, and it only took 20 minutes. As many of you probably have heard of TrustedForm Verify to this point, but before I kind of go into it, I'm going to take a step back and kind of paint a picture. So let's say this is 2 years ago. I'm here at Active Prospect, and I have a few clients that are using TrustedForm. They're getting those generated trusted forms to where you click on the link and you can see, the video playback of the consumer's actions. And they ask me, hey, what's the easiest way to kind of sift through this, make sure that our language is what we expect it to be. And remember, this is 2 years ago. At that time, it's, hey, my suggestion is to maybe take multiple certs from all of your partners, and you're going to have to do some sort of audit, right? And some people may enjoy that stuff. I don't envy you if you do, but that could be time consuming, especially when we're talking back pre-verify. You go into that certificate link and you watch that video, and let's say you have Billy Bob who has been watching the 6 o'clock news. Maybe he's watching Wheel of Fortune as he's filling out a form. He wants to make sure he gets the right puzzle. And next thing you know, you look up and it's 8, 9, 10 minutes that they've been on that form, right? Well, obviously, a lot of the times that certificate consent language is going to be at the very end of that. So if you're doing an audit, what are you doing? You're sitting there and you're watching that video, and then you're getting to the end of that video, and then you're clicking pause, and then you're like, oh, now you have to analyze the consent language, maybe take a screenshot, maybe take that certificate and look at it later and determine, okay, this is good for me or not. And that's a scenario where that's simply one certificate for one of your partners, right? So how can we fix this? Implement TrustedForm Verify. All right, so what TrustedForm Verify is doing is it's taking all of that consent language and it puts them all into the same location within a user interface. So you're no longer having to click on each of the certificates to see the different consent language. And then once you're there and you have that consent language, what do you do from there? Well, you tell the system, hey, this consent language looks good to me, or this consent language, I would reject this. This does not look good to me. And again, you're doing all of this with just a couple of clicks within the same area of the platform. And that's where it's really saved a lot of my clients a ton of time, mainly, right? Because in that first scenario, maybe your boss by the end of that 10 minutes and you do that 10 times, you didn't get to some work that you needed to get done and take care of some other business, right? So it's allowing you to pull that information in. I also have a ton of clients that kind of are more proactive with the approach, and they're getting the language from their partners up front. And then you maybe take that back and work with your legal team to say, okay, is this acceptable language? And then there's the ability for you to upload that language and pre-approve it per se within LeadConduit or within TrustedForm Verify as well. So again, just by the few ways that I mentioned, a ton of time saving from how it was to what it is now, and not to only mention, right, once you're on the newest version of Verify and TrustedForm, you also have ways to kind of skip an activity on the certificates themselves. So you no longer have to watch the entire video to kind of understand and get a grip on the consent and what happened in that journey with the consumer.
Maybe I shouldn't admit this, but I may have accidentally sort of ruined one of my AP laptops out of frustration of just watching those recordings nonstop. And then you've got a 20-minute recording and you're waiting for this one point to see the consent language. And that's the one point where you looked away and now you have to do it all again. I am past the statute of limitations on that. If HR is listening, I'm still good, I think. But yeah, that's one big point of frustration, and that's just me as a client, as an employee, as a client who has an actual TCPA lawsuit, and you're sitting there doing that. Like, gosh, that was just really rough. So not having to do that anymore is just a lifesaver for our clients and for us, right? So Dion can spend a lot more time helping out the clients.
Yeah, absolutely. And yeah, to that point, I mean, if we're kind of quickly jumping into the LeadConduit aspect of it, right? Prior to LeadConduit, right, we have the TrustedForm Verify, and I kind of explained what was there or what has come of that. But what's more important, especially, I don't want to say more important, but what's important that we've recently implemented is the one-to-one consent feature within TrustedForm Verify. So if you have that TrustedForm Verify, there's now a one-to-one consent feature to where there's a little work that needs to be done on the back end as far as the partners are concerned, right? But it's mainly making sure that that name that you expect to see on the form does exist, right? And a way for you to be able to see that information quickly without clicking into the actual certificate itself. Be able to have that confirmation that your name, if you're ABC Construction, that ABC Construction as it should be, to give you that coverage for TCPA, that it was there within the document. So maybe Scott, you can talk a little bit to how that integrates with LeadConduit.
Yeah, great point. So I'm going to come back to the low code thing, right? Where if someone is using LeadConduit, they're processing leads through their flows, they're getting them from first party, third party, social, whatever, sending them to their CRMs, and they want to start verifying their consents. Once they've got their consent language set up in TrustedForm, all they really are doing is clicking a button to add TrustedForm. It's going to ask them to put in their business name. So they type in ABC Construction, they save their flow. And now all leads that are coming through that flow are being checked for verify, as well as ideally retain as well. So you're not writing code to make those API calls, do those checks, have the logic filter out leads that aren't compliant for you. You're clicking 3 buttons instead. And that's just, a lot of the businesses that we work with don't have big teams of engineers, right? And it just saves them countless hours by just doing those 3 clicks instead. And it makes the process quite easier. And that really applies to all of the sort of pre-built add-on services that we have within LeadConduit, of course. But with TrustedForm, and as we're getting ready for this Verify for Verify, if you're already using LeadConduit, you're not talking to your engineers about all you have to do to start making the API call to retain and verify and make sure that you've got your consent. You're just clicking 3 buttons. Much easier.
Yeah, to that, just to add there, Scott, you actually alluded to it, but I mentioned the Anura fraud detection. I mentioned some of our known litigators a little bit earlier, but all of that, again, I mentioned flows earlier as well, is within the same flow. So if you're not already aware, this is all happening real time, right? So how you filter the information in the system, and or maybe not, maybe it's just as far as the data is concerned, right? I mentioned how you can easily pull the information out of our system. Maybe you say, hey, if there's a cost implication, I don't want to apply this to 100% of my leads right now. Well, what's a way that I can get some of that information without kind of jumping headfirst in? And there's easy ways in LeadConduit to do that, with maybe applying it to certain partners of yours, maybe applying it for a specific number of leads for you to collect that data and send it over, right? So all of that's happening in the flow. All of that happens real time, so that you still keep that speed to lead and don't have any issues there.
Yeah, that's one concern we hear from a lot of folks sometimes when they're, starting to get on with LeadConduit, right? Hey, I see all these great filters and abilities I have to reject certain leads. And it makes it very easy to do that. But it's generally a good idea to work with your vendors in advance and let them know, hey, I'm planning to not accept duplicate leads, right? Because quite a few of our checks can really be done at the ping level as well, which, again, coming back to what I was mentioning earlier, really generally benefits the vendors, because it allows them to make sure that they're monetizing those leads. Good idea to generally just investigate first using LeadConduit. Oh, how many leads am I getting that are fraudulent? How many am I getting that are known litigators? I would advise, if you're just going to append that it's a known litigator, probably still don't call them. But it makes it really easy to just identify that information first before you're going to try and filter out anything as well.
Yeah, I'm going to kind of tie a lot of this in with a question that I saw, as far as how easy is LeadConduit to use, especially if you may be someone that's technically challenged. Very easy. So, I mean, let's start with the fact that, right, at Active Prospect here, if you're starting with this, you'll get an onboarding specialist, right? There's a specific person that will be allotted to your account to kind of help with some of that technical stuff up front, as well as a customer success manager such as myself to help answer any additional questions that you have. But the actual implementation of it, even when you're making changes outside of onboarding, right, typically it's a few clicks. And one of the things we pride ourselves on as well is having a huge knowledge base, right? We have an external knowledge base where folks like yourself can look up almost anything as far as how to do it, or what is this, what is TrustedForm, what is LeadConduit, what can I do within LeadConduit, what are some of these add-ons, what is real-time bidding, as Scott mentioned earlier, and get a great idea on how to easily implement it that way as well. So you do not have to, have gone to technical masterclass to be able to work with LeadConduit.
Yeah, I was a history major and I'm in charge of the product. You don't have to be some, super technical person to, really use this platform. Really the most technical things are like, if I'm using my own custom CRM where we don't have a pre-built integration with your, worst thing is like, I'm going to have to match how we're sending first underscore name to F name for the field first name. That's about as hard as that type of stuff will get. But again, that's not at the level of really needing to hire a full-blown engineer who's gone to college or a boot camp for it, right? Like it's a much lower level of like technical investment required for using it. And to be transparent, if I think about what are the biggest sort of complaints or concerns we've had over the years with the LeadConduit UI, it's primarily been that sometimes it can be slow, but we've really upgraded a lot of our front end architecture this year, and we've seen a drastic reduction in that. So I do believe we have probably the best in class for this type of product UI, for it just being really clean, simple to understand for a non-technical person, as well as being really fast and responsive, even if you have a flow with a couple thousand rules, right? We really are, I think, the best in class there.
Great. And while we're on the subject of this, there was a good question that came in, got a couple of upvotes. It says, how does TrustedForm Verify check if your company's name is not only on the page, but the associated box is checked as well?
Scott, so yeah, with that one, I can go ahead and take that first part, and then Scott, maybe if you want to jump in. But I kind of alluded to it earlier. There's the element on the back end where consent tagging, right? We're working with your partners for consent tagging, to where essentially on that back end, they're confirming what that one name will be on the form as well, right? And then you're on the front end through those few clicks of LeadConduit and TrustedForm Verify within LeadConduit, also telling the system this is what the name should be. Right. So within that API that's happening real time in LeadConduit, matching those up and making sure it's what both you and your partner expected it to be. And then if not, then maybe you can make decisions on that as well. And then, sorry, it left me here, but I think there was a second part to that question.
Yeah. How does TrustedForm check if your company's name is not only on the page, but the associated box is checked as well?
Yeah, so it's going to also check that the name in the checkbox within that TrustedForm certificate also.
Yeah, exactly. As long as the owner of that website, if it's a third-party vendor, has tagged, where all the language is going to be, then we're going to capture everything there. And then for the the lead buyer using LeadConduit, again, it's a couple clicks, type in your business name, save your flow, and now you're checking for consent programmatically with every lead that comes through that flow.
Awesome. And another question I saw kind of came up. Dion, you had mentioned some integrations that we have. Really quick, I'll note that all of our integrations and add-ons are listed on our website. Scroll down to the bottom, you can click on those, search for them, and they're all listed there. But there is a question that says, does LeadConduit have any integration with the federal or state do not call lists? Should callers give more scrutiny to leads for DNC listed numbers?
Yeah, so to the first part of that, I mentioned how earlier we have contact center compliance litigator scrub. So, and I'll just kind of take a step back. I think Scott possibly mentioned how we have certain add-ons, but then integrations as well, right? So there are certain add-ons we have where you can just plug and play, right? You see the price of them, and then you just keep it moving. And that's what the known litigator would be. But then we also do have an integration also with DNC.com for the national DNC do not call list. And that one, however, is what we call a bring your own credentials integration. So although there is an integration for that one particularly, and that's technically in a different section on the website, but you would already need to come with that partnership with DNC.com. And then we easily take and say, hey, what's your login credentials that you have that's attached to that DNC national list, and we can plop it into your flow and check that there as well.
Yeah, exactly. So that's another one, you know, where you're not needing to set up the integration yourself in any sort of way. You're just selecting it, adding it. And, you know, if you're going to, since to bring your own credentials, you plug in your, I think it's an API key that they give you, and then you save it. And then it works that way. You know, that is one that it really makes more sense, I think, for generally the users to have their own account with, rather than us acting as some sort of reseller for. So that's typically what we see. But in addition to that, we also have, you know, features like suppression lists that allows you to check any list that you have on your own. So we see a lot of folks also, in addition to checking the, you know, national DNC list via service like contact center compliance, we see them checking their own internal DNC lists, right? That they're just adding, you know, their internal DNC leads onto, right? And then they can programmatically check that within LeadConduit. They can check that on the ping as well, right? So that they let the vendor know sooner rather than later that, hey, this is on my internal DNC, or it's a duplicate or whatever. I won't be accepting this lead, and then they can, you know, monetize that elsewhere.
All right, great. Thank you, gentlemen. And there were a couple of more polls put into the chat there, basically just asking if you're interested in a demo of our Verify product or of our LeadConduit product. Feel free to answer to those, and we can get those demos scheduled and set up for you so you can see it more. There were a couple of questions about what is LeadConduit, how do you use it. Feel free to select that you would like a demo, and we can show you that and give you more in depth there. But kind of transitioning from that, so just to kind of talk a little bit about what Dion and Scott touched on earlier. We're transitioning over boosting your performance marketing efforts with compliant, optimized leads. As far as marketing goes, do either of you want to touch on that?
Yeah, so I can touch on that one. I mean, that really is sort of a lot of what we've been talking about today. And to me, when you're thinking about LeadConduit, sort of boosting your performance marketing efforts, it's really about the ease of setting rules for what defines a good compliant lead for your individual business, right? You know, maybe a lot of your leads are coming from your, you know, owned and operated sites. So you're really just needing to make sure that the certificate is retained when you have it, right? And then we can support that. Maybe you're buying a lot of third-party leads from vendors who you're new to working with, right? And then you want to make sure that you're checking something like a NURA or a contact center compliance or a blacklist alliance as well, in addition to that. So to me, you know, it's about the easy flexibility of putting rules around leads based on sort of your expectations and understanding of those specific leads. And again, doing it in a very low code, simple, non-technical way.
Yeah, and I'll jump in also and kind of piggyback off of that, but also touch on another question that I saw. And the question mentioned how LeadConduit can help stay compliant with some of these new TCPA rules and things of that nature, right? So I think at the high level, right, it would be you and your legal team kind of defining what's compliant for your company, right? However, with TrustedForm within LeadConduit, and Scott just mentioned TrustedForm Retain as well. Within LeadConduit, not only can that verify happen, but I'm kind of tying this together also with the kind of the easy use and how you don't need the API on the back end. You can use the API within LeadConduit because you have TrustedForm Retain that you're retaining automatically in the system for that long-term access, right? So you'll have that certificate that may come over from your partner, right? But in order to make sure that you have long-term access to that certificate to then be able to look at that session replay, the certificate needs to be retained. And that's done within one step within the platform. And then we then take that certificate link and pass it over to your CRM with the rest of the payload. Right. So at that point, you have a link in your CRM that you can click on anytime for up to 5 years to make sure you're fully covered on the statute of limitation. And you'll be able to see that playback if you have any issues or possibly need to look at it in the future.
All right, awesome. And I mean, obviously, this is going to help out everyone's marketing team. So, if you want to, can you talk more on the like lead scoring and how LeadConduit and TrustedForm Verify can help in any way in that aspect, Dion?
Yeah, I can speak to that. I mean, I've had it kind of seemed like it was out of nowhere, but I feel like in the last 6 months, I've had a lot of folks asking about how we can help with lead scoring, right? Because ultimately that still ties up to or bubbles up to that quality, right? And how you might be defining that quality. Well, we have, integrations such as Faraday. Some of you may or may not be familiar with, to where you can implement that into LeadConduit. But then I've also had some clients that have kind of used LeadConduit in a simplified way. They've created the lead scoring definitions on their end, and you can still use LeadConduit to push that information over, right? So I'm not sure if this has come up before, but like we can, also tell the system, hey, if a certain information comes in, I also want to pass this additional name or this additional information over to my CRM. And it might be a lead score in that situation, right? If I make sure that the phone number is good, if I make sure everything from face value looks good, maybe I want to tell our CRM, hey, this is a 10 lead, and I can pass that over. We can pass that over with the lead data so that you and your team can then see that in your CRM view as well. So I think there's multiple ways to think about lead scoring and how to use it, but it is coming up a lot more. And this also then goes back to that, if you're possibly using a lead scoring tool that's not Faraday, right? Let us know. As long as it has an API, we can integrate with it. And we can also, if it would benefit you and your team and make sense, look into creating an actual integration for that tool.
Yeah, we see a ton of customers integrating with their own, sort of lead scoring systems all the time. We see them using sort of third-party tools like Faraday. We tend to be a little bit agnostic when we're sort of recommending lead scoring services. To our clients, we'll let them know which ones are common in their vertical and stuff. But we'd love to build more integrations with those services. But for the customers using their own tool, again, they can integrate. If there's an API, they can integrate with that today, append that information to leads, route them differently, filter them differently, whatever it is they want to do. But yeah, that's a really powerful aspect of LeadConduit is they can just easily do that and make rules around it, again, without a developer.
All right, great. I want to leave plenty of time for Q&A because it looks like we got quite a few. Once again, chat, if you have any questions, click on the question mark on the right there and add your question in. I want to go ahead and move along to that Q&A right now, just so we can get everybody's questions answered. The top question here, and I can actually kind of touch on this one, says, do you guys have any specific insight to what you are doing in the mass tort vertical? I have been an SDR in our legal vertical for part of my time here at Active Prospect, and we are part of the Mass Tort Vendors Association. We have a sales director, Earl McCarthy, who works directly in legal, and his primary focus is on mass tort. So that is definitely an area that we feel strongly about and we're working hard in, and I would encourage you to select that you want a demo of the product, and we can get that meeting scheduled with Earl and definitely go more in depth on that. Next question here says, we are a small company. I would like to know more about the language to use and when.
Scott,
we went off. We went off mute at the same time there. Yeah. So I know this can be harder for smaller companies, but it is generally good to at least have some sort of conversation with legal counsel to figure out what the right consent language is for your business. But we make it pretty simple for, again, those small businesses to make sure that they're checking that consent programmatically every time without needing to invest in that. But in this industry, there's a lot of folks who will give you a lot of opinions on what language you should use and when. And I would advise you listen to the legal minds in the industry. As much as I love myself as a talking head on a webinar, I'm probably not the right person to tell you what the right language is. And I personally would advise you not put too much weight in the words of someone who doesn't have a legal background telling you what the right language that you should use as a small business is. But talk to your peers, talk to similar businesses, to yourself who are sort of getting ready to navigate these FCC changes. That's absolutely important as well. But, you know, when you want to get the, you know, sort of final word on what is the right language to use for your business, trust a lawyer, I would say. That's going to be your best bet. Yeah. Do you have anything on that, Dion?
No, that was exactly what I was going to say, but you probably put it a little bit more eloquently. So I think we can leave.
Oh, you're selling yourself short. You would have put it better. But yeah, it's really something where, you know, that's one of the challenges of this job is those questions. Those are really important questions to ask, but they're questions that our business is about facilitating, making sure it's really easy for you to make sure you're enforcing those rules, enforcing getting leads with the right consent language, and not taking on and calling leads without it, and just making that whole sort of technical mess really easy. But when it comes to determining the right language for your business, trust a lawyer. Troutman and Mean, I will always shout out them. They're always a good one to go with.
All right, I saw a really good question here. It says, does the seller need to only retain the certificate ID URL, or do they need to retain and store the playback of the lead to be in compliance of the one-to-one ruling?
So how retain works is a lead fills out a form. And when they do that, the certificate URL is created. And then you make the API call within LeadConduit to make it really easy, but to make that retain saying, hey, this lead, I want to store this certificate to my business. And, you know, again, LeadConduit will make it easy if the API call fails, if that lead is like 200 days old or something like that. But assuming that all of that is good, you make that retain call. What matters to you then is storing and saving that certificate URL, that full URL, ideally. I do see some customers just use what we call the token. And then when they view a certificate, they have to, you know, type in TrustedForm.cert.com/ and then they put in the token. So it's best to just save the full URL to your system. And then by default, all accounts with us have those certificates stored for 5 years. I believe the statute of limitations on TCPA stuff is 4 years, and a lot of legal counsel advises to keep it for 5 years. So make the API call to retain, whether it's in LeadConduit, ideally, or not in your own system. But then make sure you are holding on to that certificate URL in whatever system of record you have along with that lead. So I have a system to go to search for John Smith. And in John Smith's information is that URL. So if John Smith, you know, takes any legal action against me in those 5 years after I, you know, acquire that lead, I'm just going to the system and pulling up that certificate URL. So to answer the question, the URL is the video, right? As long as you have that URL and you're storing it with that particular lead, you've got access to that video. As long as you have an active account with us, you know, you've got it. Just make sure you store that URL appropriately. We have seen clients have some issues before where they're not storing the cert URL with the lead. They've just got a list of 1,000 cert URLs and you have no idea which one belongs to which lead. That tends to be less of a problem with the clients using LeadConduit, of course, because we're making sure that we're just delivering that field every time. But it's really important to make sure you are storing that certificate URL with that lead so that if there's a problem with that lead, you've got the URL for it. You open it up, you've got the recording.
All right, and then this one here I saw was kind of interesting. It says, my client doesn't pay per lead, but instead pays per conversion. Does that affect how this new requirement might apply to us?
It's a great question. My initial thought on that would be that it would not affect it.
I could see it going either way.
Yeah.
It depends on the specifics of that business relationship there. And I know I'm a broken record at this point on the webinar, but anytime you're in the legal gray area like this, a lawyer is the best person to make sure that you're doing the right thing with. But it really depends on the specific way that, I mean, are they getting one-to-one consent, right? When they get that lead, does that lead say it's going to go to their business and their business is going to be the one that calls them, right? And if the way that you're doing your payments via conversion means that sort of consent language and information about the business that's going to call them is not presented to the consumer, then I would assume that no, you won't. That likely will be problematic in sort of the brave new FCC world. But again, we would want to know more of the specifics, and ultimately that's something that's really an important one to check with your legal counsel on.
Yeah, if ever in doubt about anything legal, talk to a lawyer for sure. Here's an easy one for you guys. Does TrustedForm slow down page load speed?
No, it does not. Simple as that. No, it does not.
Simple as that.
Yep. As Scott mentioned, you just have that, it's running on that JavaScript. It's running in the background of the form, right? It's not, the consumer's not going to know any different than a typical form that they're filling out. They're just filling that out. And once submitted, that then certificate is generated. And, we have the access to that video playback, but there should be no slowdown or anything different, especially for the consumer experience, because TrustedForm is running.
Yeah, and in my 5 years with Active Prospect, I will say that we've heard some sort of lead publishers say, I think TrustedForm is slowing down my leads. And every time we've investigated it, we've found, what's this other random service, this other script that you have on your site, and that has pretty much every time been what we found. So, if you feel like you are facing any sort of slowdown from the TrustedForm script, I feel pretty confident saying that's not the source of it. But I'm also pretty confident saying that you can absolutely reach out to our support team, and they'll look into it. And our engineers will look into it. Just because we're saying we don't believe that happens doesn't mean that our team isn't here to help you if you believe something similar to that may be happening today. We're here to support you with that. But in my experience with the company, of the maybe 4 times I think this is brought up, we've always found that there's something else on that particular website, and pointed them in that direction. And, they haven't come back to say TrustedForm is a problem. So feel confident saying that's not the problem, but also our team is here to help support you if, you're just getting confused as to what's going on your page.
All right, I'm gonna go. We got a couple more questions we can answer here before we gotta start wrapping up, but make it simple. What does it cost? Dion, you might be a good person to answer on that one.
Yeah, so honestly, it's probably best, honestly, to request the demo and talk to a sales representative about that, because it could completely depend on what you plan to do with the system right there. We've talked about a lot of it today. There are a lot of different elements to the system. There's the LeadConduit, there's the TrustedForm element, there's TrustedForm Verify element. One that we haven't really mentioned today is TrustedForm Insights, to where you can get information like the domain, the IP address, the geolocation, right? Some of that information that's shown on the TrustedForm, so the face of the TrustedForm certificate, you can have that type of information delivered to you as well. So that really just depends. A lot of times I know in home services, it's kind of a per lead type of basis, but I do not believe that to be the case in all verticals. So yeah, I think that would be better to get specifics, if kind of have that initial conversation so we can hear out exactly what you're looking to do with the system, exactly how many leads you're buying and generating, and then go from there.
Yeah. It's always been sort of a volume-based negotiation a lot of the time, but also as we talk about our add-ons or those reseller services I mentioned, you can go onto the Active Prospect website and see a list of those. Because those are reseller services, they all have sort of their own unique individual pricing that's displayed on that website. So it really depends on what all do you want to use, right? Do you want to use Blacklist Alliance and Litigator Scrub and Denurai and TrustedForm because you really want to make sure you're compliant? Well, that's different versus someone who's, just doing TrustedForm by itself, right? So there's a lot of flexibility. When I was in Dion's role as customer success, the line I would always give was, I love LeadConduit. The thing that's so great about it is it's so flexible and can be used in so many different ways. The thing I don't like about LeadConduit is that it's so flexible and can be used in so many different ways, right? Because there's a lot of variation. But that being said, next month we are planning to bring back LeadConduit self-service, and there will be published pricing on the website once that goes live. Now, again, it's always best to really talk to our sales team so we can get a good idea of what it is you're trying to do and how best we can help you achieve that. Maybe it makes sense for you to start with the self-service account, and they'll help guide you towards that. But maybe it makes sense based on your volume to just really focus on sort of figuring out sort of like an enterprise deal based on what you're doing with your business. So you'll see some pricing on the website, but it's always best to talk to sales because they'll help you figure out specifically what you're doing and how we can best serve you, and what pricing for that service will look like.
All right, we got time for one more question. I will add on that too. A lot of it comes down to volume as well, at least on the home services side of things. I mean, with any business, the higher the volume you have, there's always something that can be worked on there. And that's why I like what the other two guys said. Reach out to a sales director, reach out to myself. I can get you in touch with one of our sales directors, and we can certainly have a conversation more in depth around pricing. So last question we'll do here. For someone who isn't actively using your software, can you give a for dummies list of top benefits to compliance for one-to-one with LeadConduit compared to trying to manage it by yourself?
Well, I
That's a
think,
long question.
yeah,
Go
well,
ahead,
I think the main thing here, if we're talking specifically the one-to-one aspect of it, which that question asked, I would focus on TrustedForm, verify, and learning there, right? That's our solution to helping kind of being that software that sits in the middle, to helping the publishers identify the language or that one-to-one consent that's on their end, for helping the buyers on your end within LeadConduit. Again, we said this a million times, but with just a few clicks of a buttons, telling the system this is what that one-to-one consent should be. And then within the LeadConduit flow, that returning, hey, one-to-one consent was true. It's as you would expect it to be. One-to-one consent was false. You may even have a situation where that name is different on different forms for different partners. We can accommodate that as well by using the rules and saying, find this name for partner A, but it should say a different name for partner C. And ultimately, as it flows through LeadConduit, it's going to do the same thing and check those specific names and look for that one-to-one. So I would really focus on TrustedForm, verify with LeadConduit to simplify the process as much as possible while making sure you have that one-to-one compliance.
Yeah, I was going to answer, but that was perfect. Focus on verify first. If making sure you're compliant, that's the most important thing. Focus on that, making sure you're able to verify and retain certificates from your leads, and then looking at your sort of technical aptitude and your existing tech stack and the rules you want to make around one-to-one consent. That's where it really makes sense to factor in LeadConduit into that decision, right? Do you have a big team of engineers that you've been building your own internal lead system for a decade for? Obviously, I still think we'd have some benefits to a person like that, but it might be a different equation to, a smaller shop that doesn't have a big team of engineers able to help them out with those types of things. So focus on verify, focus on making sure you can be compliant, and then factor in LeadConduit when it comes to your sort of technical aptitude for implementing all that comes with, trying to be a compliant business.
All right, awesome. Well, thank you everyone for coming today. Thank you for those of you that tune in later and watch the recording. Make sure you tune in for our next episode. It's the final one of 2024, and we will have the one and only Margaret Wise, our CRO here at Active Prospect. The title of that one is the 2024 FCC Compliance Recap, Preparing for the Year Ahead, and it's going to be a big year. Links are in the chat. Please go look at those. Fill out a poll if you want to learn more and get a demo. Thank you, Dion and Scott, and all of our background people today. And everyone have a wonderful Thanksgiving. Bye.
Take care.